You're listening to Your Magical Midlife. This podcast is for women who are seekers, dreamers, and out-of-the-box thinkers. If you're a Gen X woman who never quite fit in, and probably never will, listen up. I'm Kate Higgins, your host. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and coach, and I'm here to guide you through the expansive, exhilarating, and sometimes exhausting crossroads that we find ourselves in at midlife. Whether you're a seasoned listener or just joining the adventure, think of this podcast as your hot pink convertible cruising down the highway of change. Together we'll navigate the sometimes baffling backroads of midlife and collect all the cool souvenirs along the way. Get in and buckle up. Our map may have flown out the window miles ago, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to have a blast. Let's hit the road and discover the magic just around the bend. Wiley Women is a wellness brand that wants you to live your best midlife. Developed by a naturopath, they offer tinctures, supplements, and drink mixes. Wiley uses plant medicine and clinical studies to demystify and embrace the hormonal powers and hidden complexities of grown women from the inside. Female formulated and female founded. Plus, they offer free shipping and easy returns. I love the Unworried tincture, which has bacopa, holy basil, passion flower, and reishi. It helps calm my body and stops the spinouts. It reduces jitters and lightens my mood. Go to www.wileywomen.com and use code KATEH2O at checkout to get 20% off. That's www.wileywomen.com and use code KATEH2O for 20% off. Jane Boon is an adventurer at heart and technologist by training. She is fascinated by how things work and why things happen. She's an academic, an artist, an engineer, and fellow Gen Xer. Jane's curiosity and openness to experience led her down the unexpected path of writing erotica. She recently released her second novel, Bold Strokes, which follows the worlds of finance, art, and professional dominatrix work.
As a 57-year-old woman, I think it's pretty exciting that we're finally getting our moment in the sun and recognizing all the advantages that accrue to us because of our age instead of just the disadvantages.
Absolutely. I'm just going to ask, what do you think the advantages are of being older?
I'm so much less worried about what people will think. And let me tell you, that's liberating. You know, I was a very diligent kid, very concerned about getting A's, very concerned about pleasing my parents and my peers and doing all that stuff. And it's liberating being able to deprioritize what other people think versus what I think. And I think that comes from perspective and experience.
Yeah, I think that's a very unique to people who were raised female. I don't think boys are raised to care as much, if at all, of what other people think of them.
And maybe their fathers or just, having the well-established archetype of what a successful man looks like. I think that's the burden that a lot of men carry. And then we're burdened with a very different kind of set of expectations and scripts. And it's great to sort of blow that out of the water.
It is. What was the biggest expectation for you as a child?
That I would just sort of keep my head down and do the work, get good grades, not cause any trouble. My family was a bit complicated and my parents didn't have a lot of attention and energy because of other things that were going on. And so I think I recognized my job was to not create conflict or problems. And so I just did my thing and was sort of quiet about it.
Yeah. Were you a good girl when you were growing up?
Yes, a very good girl. And the grades to prove it. No problems with boys. In fact, I was a virgin until I was in college. I mean, I wasn't sexually adventuresome. I was sort of a slow starter. I wasn't going to let anything get in the way of my sense of where I wanted to be. And whatever that was, I mean, it was pretty inchoate at the time, but I knew I wanted to do more.
I think there's a lot to be said for being a late bloomer. I was also a slow starter. I was a very cautious,
anxious child.
Yeah.
But I wanted, that was like the outside. The inside, I wanted so much more. And my confines were the just above blue collar, like middle class household I grew up in, and the expectation that I would be someone's wife, have some kids, do something that people understood, do something that my mother could tell people about in the grocery store, that everyone understood what it was.
I know, it's really important. You got to give your parents bragging, right? It's a burden I carry to this day. I'm always very happy when I have some accomplishment I can share with my mother so that she can share it with her friends, because I know it matters to her. It's one source of pleasure I could provide. But yeah, I mean, I was fortunate in that my strengths, if you will, didn't fall in the girly areas. I was really good at math and science. So the expectation was that I would do something STEM-y. And so once I announced that I was going to do engineering, everybody's like, aha, that's what she's going to do. So it was a non-traditional path, but all the same, to be a woman in a male-dominated field is complicated and at times quite.
Yeah, I was reading your bio and I was struck that I didn't know that you had a degree in engineering. Not only do you have a degree in engineering, but you have a degree in engineering from MIT.
That's right. I have a Ph.D. So like I've got serious nerd cred.
1 second. That's beyond nerd cred. That's like super genius nerd cred.
You know, I joke that PhDs are not signs of intelligence. They're signs of masochism because they're long, annoying slogs. And, you know, the work is the work. And if you dig long enough, deep enough, you'll uncover some nugget that's worthy of a dissertation. It's just a question of doing the work. And a lot of people decide it's not worth it. I was really burnt out after I did my master's at MIT and sort of came to the realization, oh my God, I've never had any fun. All these people out there were having fun, but I was studying for my calculus exams. How about you? Did you find fun eventually?
Oh, no, I did the absolute opposite of you. I fittered away and like a butterfly went from thing to thing for my whole 20s. And
I mean, that's you were ahead of your time. I mean, that's the millennial and the current crop of people coming out of school now. They all do that because, I mean, really, how smart were you when you were picking undergraduate programs? I mean, if I knew now, if I knew then what I know now, I would have chosen entirely different things.
What would you have chosen?
I think I would have been a very good doctor, but I also like that it's high status piecework. So, you know, it's highly compensated, you're taken seriously, which I really like about engineering as well. But, you know, you do the work and you leave. And, you know, there's some types of medicine where you have a longitudinal relationship with your patients, but that's not what I would want. I would just want to be like in there, in the room, and then move on. And you don't know that about yourself until you've, you know, got some years under your belt, what exactly it is that kind of excites you and motivates you. I mean, it was kind of shocking to me when I transitioned from engineering to writing. I'm like, I don't know, can I do this? Maybe. Let's try it.
How did that happen? So let me just walk it through. So you got your master's, then you worked in engineering.
Then I worked as an engineer, even though I didn't really like engineering. So, and then all my friends had PhDs. So I thought, well, see if I can get one. So I did it at night at Northeastern in Boston. And I was working at a software company that wound up going under. And around that time, I met my husband, who was living in New York. So it seemed like a good time to move to New York and see what happened with the relationship with him. And once I arrived in New York, I'm like, well, what am I going to do here? Because with a PhD in industrial engineering, the easiest option for me would have become a quant on Wall Street, like do the number crunching. You know, I would have had to do, I don't know, maybe 6 months, 8 months of skills upgrading, but it wouldn't have been hard. And I thought, I know myself enough. I don't want anybody yelling at me every day. This would be too painful. I don't want to be in that kind of high stakes, high pressure, high misery environment. And as I was approaching 40, that was pretty clear to me. So I started writing. My husband's a journalist, so I sort of had somebody to model how to do that. And it was intensely satisfying in a way that I found kind of stunning. And so I kept at it.
Were you a writer always? Like before, did you dabble in writing?
I dabbled in writing. I wrote for the student paper, but it was an engineering school, so the bar was really low to participation. But yeah, so words are very familiar to me. And at first, I just brought the skills that I'd used writing technical papers and journal articles to magazine articles and newspaper articles. It's nonfiction, it's serious, it's analytical. And that was a pretty straightforward transition. And then when I was in my phase in my 20s, one of the things I dabbled in was BDSM. And one of my girlfriends was a dominatrix. And I used to have this fantasy. Well, what would it be like to step into her world for a month? What would it be like to be her, to own a room, to meet a stranger and make magic happen at the drop of a hat? And I always sort of mulled on this idea, and that became the genesis of my first novel, sort of an accidental dominatrix. And it was a little crazy taking it on. I'm married now to the guy that I moved to New York with. I mean, would he have an issue with it? Would our friends think this was kind of weird? But quite frankly, he's the grown up, and I was like, well, I think it'll make me more interesting. I don't think it'll make me a pariah. Let's get it on. Let's see what happens.
So you took it on to do a writing experiment, or you took it on and actually worked as a dominatrix?
No, I took on as a writing experiment.
Yeah.
No, I'm not quite that outrageous. That I started working on it in my 40s. I think there would have been fine market for my services, but that wasn't really quite what I had in mind. But it was enough to think about it.
I imagine you did a couple of ride-alongs, though.
I have seen some things. Let me tell you, I have seen some things, and professional sex work, like sex work as done by really capable professionals, it's different than, just sort of going into a room as an amateur. And like how the scenes are navigated, how they're started, how they're finished, how you get rid of the client. I mean, I found all that stuff fascinating because like the psychology of it is interesting too. Like just getting rid of the client, I thought was genius. Like, well, how do you do that? She's like, I asked them where they parked their car. Why do you do that? It gets them thinking about what they're doing next. I asked them, what do they have planned for the afternoon? Like, oh, so that gets them out of the room where they've been having so much fun and instills a little anxiety. It just the mechanics of the work fascinated me. And so I buried myself in memoir of sex workers and started writing in the voice of one, which was pretty ballsy. Fortunately, the sex workers who've read it acknowledged that it's pretty accurate representation of the work. So I'm very pleased about that. But it was pretty crazy to try it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I have adjacent experience in that in my 20s, I worked within the nightlife scene in New York City. And I've met many girls at the time, women in their early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, who were either professional strippers or professional dominatrixes. And that was kind of a thing because I was in like the goth world of nightlife. And that was fairly common. I can say I probably knew 5 or 6 women who were dominatrixes at that time.
It was a light bulb moment for me, as I'm sure you know, was just how consent and negotiations are at the core of all of these encounters. And it was very powerful. And you meet fascinating people. I mean, who winds up in the demi mode, sort of on a fringe of society. These people are riveting.
Absolutely. But I think what's interesting, and to tie what you're doing and what you've done with the work that I do, is I think a lot of women, they don't have to go out and be a dominatrix. That's not for everybody. But there's a lesson to be learned about setting limits, setting boundaries, and giving up people pleasing that you could learn from those women.
Absolutely. And in my first novel, the protagonist is an investment banker during the financial crisis who loses her job when she notices some bad things had happened at work. And the only professional opportunity she can find is when a girlfriend of hers has an art gallery and a secret in the basement, which is that she works as a dominatrix. And the idea was that the dungeon is actually a classroom. Learning about power, you're learning about desire, you're learning about men, you're learning how to command attention and what to do with that attention. And it transforms the protagonist into a more powerful and empowered version of herself. And it has consequences in her real world. And I got to say, researching a book gives you a lot of permission. I highly recommend it to anybody who's like, wants to do something crazy, but is a little unsure how to get by it. Write a book and do lots of research.
Yeah. I think a lot of women need permission or are seeking permission to explore their own edges and pleasure. I think there's so much taboo around what are people going to think of me if I enjoy sex, enjoy my body, especially when you're an older woman. And older, I mean like past 35, right? We're such an ageist society.
Right. Well, I'm a witness to the fact that most people don't care. They're mildly curious. And for the most part, they're more interested in what they're going to have for dinner. And it's liberating once you realize the place that you occupy in their head is so much smaller than they are in their own head. It really kind of lets you be a little bit more crazy. Like I've been out about, well, obviously that I've done kink, but the year I turned 50, a girlfriend of mine was doing research into this bisexual women's sex parties, a skirt club. And so I told her, if you ever need somebody to hold your notepad while you're doing this research, count me in because I would love to go. I would love to see what's going on. I'm not bisexual, but I'm friendly. And so that was her birthday present to me, was to be her +1 at one of these parties. And, they were friendly too. And nobody cared that I wasn't like up to my elbows in pussy, if you know what I mean. It was totally fine to just watch and to be open and curious. And I think also one of the advantages we women have in these sort of sexually oriented spaces is that there's an expectation that maybe we'll just watch the first time and then it'll take a while for us to gather steam and to indulge. So there's not a lot of pressure to do anything. I've been to S&M clubs, I've been to swing clubs, I've been to all of these things that frankly, I just watch. I'm a little too germphobic to like touch, but I'm happy to observe what's going on and nobody cares. It's great.
Right.
It's wonderful. Except, maybe occasionally I'd get hit on, which is, oh, no, thank you. But thank you. And
does your husband go with you or do you go by yourself?
I go by myself because his presence would change what I see and what, so I had this idea of a scene for the novel that would take place in a swing club. So I knew some people who were going to one and I asked if I could tag along and it was fine. He just wants to report what did you see? What was it like? Knowing full well that I'm sort of germphobic and not open to that stuff. He's very chill about it all. But as a firsthand observer of some crazy shit, let me tell you, the exhibitionists are grateful for an audience and nobody cares. So long as you ask before you do anything and you're friendly.
Absolutely.
It's very simple.
Cares. Sure. Nobody cares once you're in the party, but how about your professional colleagues, the other engineers, the people you
Well,
know
I
in
would
the other world? Like, how long did
I
it
would
take
not
you to
I would not recommend being out about that unless you're a writer like me, in which case it adds to my professional seriousness that I go to these crazy places. But nobody's going to tell on you. I mean, it's pretty safe to do these things. But for the fact that I've discussed it with my husband, there's no way that he would know that I've been to any of these places. But for the fact that I've written about it, nobody would know that I've been to Skirt Club. I mean, people are not trying to hurt the people that attend these events with them. It's just not part of the ethos of these things. I mean, they're very respectful of privacy, often use a pseudonym. I mean, if you
Sure.
want to really lock things down, change your name.
Because you are such a public-facing person who's written now 2 novels about this, have you had any blowback from your other life as someone with a Ph.D. and a master's degree who worked in engineering in such a
Yeah.
straight-laced industry?
So
curious
I'm
to
an
know
object. I'm an
because
object of a lot of curiosity.
just because I'm only asking because I have also led a very dualistic life, right? I worked in traditional psychiatry for a long, long time. At the same time, I was secretly going in nightclubs, reading tarot, working as an astrologer, and at the end, the last decade, working as a professional burlesque performer, touring, and then going back to the psych hospital.
That's
So
exhausting. I'm
I
just tired thinking about it. It must have been exhausting keeping all the balls in the air that you were juggling.
right, being terrified that one of my patients would find my social media with my burlesque name, videos of me on YouTube at festivals, being like, "That's my therapist." Oh, they're her boobs.
So the one area where I was most concerned is I'm on the board of trustees at the university that I attended,
Okay.
which is a very conservative engineering school. I was a little worried, especially on the cusp of the publication of the first novel, that I might become a pariah on the board. So one of the things that I did was I warned everybody. I was very upfront. I said, I got this novel coming out. It's a little risque. And I even showed this opening scene that's 1 page long, and I showed it around just so, the word talk is in there. There's no pussyfooting about what the nature of the content. And so then the pandemic happened. So we're all meeting on Zoom. And every time there'd be like a Zoom meeting, somebody would ask me, "So how's your book doing?" Because it got published. And I said, "Just want to let you know the book is dirty, but it's doing okay. Just got a review by Jessica Stoya in her porn site." I was just really forthright about it. And I think having talked about it early kind of inoculated me
Mm.
against potentially worse repercussions. The second book just came out, but everybody's been warned, everybody knows, and I'm sort of the colorful person on the board, where everybody else is sort of the straight-laced engineering type. They've got the artistic freak in the corner, I guess.
It takes a lot of bravery to be the colorful person in the room.
It does, but I will say this: having engineering degrees, it's a marker of seriousness. And, I fit in that box pretty comfortably. I look like a woman engineer. I talk like a woman engineer. So that adds a certain level of, I think they just think of this as sort of like this harmless eccentricity.
Hmm.
So there is a utility in having kind of the mask of a profession that is well regarded in society, whatever that profession is, perhaps psychiatry or psychology.
So you've written now 2 books, and they're
Yes.
both,
Dirty.
well, erotic.
Yeah.
They're erotic novels.
Yeah.
Were you always somebody who was curious? Were you always a seeker, even though you were put into this academic box? from a young age, high achieving. I mean, I know you don't just go straight to the prestigious universities you went to. You must have been like a very diligent, hardworking, academically oriented person.
So,
how did that happen?
yeah, I don't know, a fluke of nature. Neither of my parents, they weren't on a university track. They were a more vocational track. My father was an auto mechanic. What he did do, though, was in his youth, he raced cars. And so part of the family lore was always about kind of taking physical risk. So that was something that I grew up around and didn't shy away from. As a 13-year-old, I started flying gliders. So that was pretty exciting and kind of shocking that they let like a child fly. It's not that hard. I just want to stipulate to that, but it takes a lot of responsibility, and you need to be able to count on the kid not to do anything crazy. And that's where being sort of this diligent, serious kid is very much to your advantage. So I've never shied away from putting myself in sort of a physical position of risk. I'm a swimmer. I've taken up running. I think that the gift that my father in particular gave me was a physical boldness, and takes a certain amount of nerve to open the door to an S&M club. But I think of that as sort of the same skill set as it is to sort of climb into a glider. You're not quite sure what's going to happen, and it's going to be a little crazy, but it could be very interesting. And so that's where I think some of that came. When you were doing the burlesque, what was it like the first time you got on stage?
Oh my God. I was shaking, I was sweating, I was literally thought I was going to pass out. I got through my little performance and then threw up backstage.
And you wanted to do it again, right?
And I wanted to do it again. Right.
And I think that's one thing that we learn as we age, is that these things that produce anxiety can also produce excitement. I mean, the dopamine and all that stuff, it's so tied in with all the things that might terrify us, that how to harness those moments is pretty exciting.
Yeah. But also I want to go back to something you were saying earlier, because I don't want to lose the thread on it. I think something I'm discovering as I get older, and I'm wondering if you can relate to this, being that you took this big, brave step out of the box of engineering, right? In the end, no one cares as anywhere near as much as we think they do.
I mean, we're not even supporting players in most people's lives. We're way down on the call sheet. We're background actors in the lives of our neighbors and most of our friends. It's really quite extraordinary.
And it's so freeing, though, because I think most of us are so limited and constricted by the fear of judgment. And the judgment is usually like so temporary, even if it's a blip, right? They're like, oh, she's crazy, and that's it.
And that's it. And they're, oh yeah, she's up to that stuff again. And I mean, so I have, all my friends from high school and college and even grade school, we're all on Facebook. And so as part of my book hustle, I've been doing these little vignettes on TikTok where I talk about basically the sex workers who inspired the character of my protagonist. So like I'm talking about porn stars, I'm talking about dominatrixes, I'm talking about all of these women that typically don't get the spotlight. And it all goes up on Facebook, and I think they're bored with it now. And oh yeah, Jane's in book mode. They roll their eyes, and that's it. I mean, nobody's telling me to stop. Nobody's telling me to shut up. They're just, tuning out, because after a while it stops being exciting. I mean, the first couple times it was probably kind of interesting, but by the 10th time, nobody cares.
Yeah. The high school or grammar school friends are probably like, oh, or the people who you weren't even friends with, who you just knew, who happened to follow you on Facebook. They're probably like, oh, there goes Jane again. She's talking to some stripper. Who the hell knows what she's doing?
Roll their eyes. So it must be another book she's selling, whatever. then it's like, anybody know a restaurant in St. Louis? And you just move on to the next topic.
Yeah.
And it's great. My cousins are on there. Everybody's, how's the book doing? I was expecting more pushback in my head, especially with the first book. I was like, oh my God, what are people going to say? Because of course, that the worry that so many of us women address.
Absolutely. This is the freedom I'm just starting to taste with my own work, because despite the fact that I worked in nightlife, despite the fact that I did burlesque, despite my family didn't know this, Facebook for me is like all the people in the rearview mirror. It's all the people that I haven't thought about, and they haven't thought about me since like the 90s or the 80s, maybe. And then I'm thinking like, oh no, what's that person I went to grammar school with going to think of what I'm doing? And like you said, I think the most freeing thing is if the worst thing they're saying is, oh, she was always weird, like who cares, right?
Right. It's really great. And it quite frankly, I think this all makes this more interesting. I mean, I think that's the other thing that comes with age is we appreciate the weirdos more. I use the word, it's probably a pejorative, but I use it in a very friendly way. And I'm grateful that there are like these eccentrics in my life who could surprise me and teach me something that I don't know and force me to sort of stretch my thinking in unexpected ways. It's like, thank you. Thank you, universe, for bringing this weirdo into my life.
What was the most surprising thing for you when you spent time with women who were professional providers of sex and sexuality and like what surprised you the most?
Just the business acumen. I mean, obviously they're basically artists. They're artists of the erotic moment. They're performance artists. So that was a big breakthrough for me to recognize their artistry, but also coupled that with business acumen, because I don't think you can sustain the work for very long if you don't have both, because it's really easy to burn out.
Sure.
So that was interesting. The transactional aspect of it all, I found fascinating. Like there's a candor among sex workers that is pretty heretical to those of us who are more accustomed to kind of approaching our relationships and our, even our one night stands a little bit differently. I mean, there's just, it's so specific, and how that's accomplished, I think is so interesting. But otherwise, they're just chicks who figured something out. They've got their angle, and, more power to them for, finding a job that's in many ways very liberating.
Sure. And also shockingly ordinary in so many ways. That was what was so surprising to me, is like you could live next to somebody who's a sex worker and not know. They pay their taxes, they pick their mail up, they go to the grocery store, they're in the post office, they are living next to you, living otherwise completely pedestrian lives, often with a partner that they're monogamous with.
Right. I mean, and if you can sample the buffet every day at work, maybe it's nice to come home to some steak, just to know what's waiting for you, and to have that kind of the reassurance of something steady and stable. That, I think, is the misconception of sex work, is that there are these wild nymphomaniacs, like out to, no, they're it's business. And unlike guys working in a coal mine who trade their bodies for pay and mesothelioma or some horrible disease, these are women who are exchanging their time under very different and I think healthier circumstances.
Sure. Because also my understanding is that most of their customers are really just looking for the one-to-one connection, the time, and the emotional stuff more than even the physical stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly what I've observed. And it's sort of interesting that time and attention are so valued But I think adding that sort of extracurricular aspect of it just sort of boosts the value. It's exciting to get a little strange, to wonder what's going to happen moment to moment, where the familiar obviously doesn't offer those thrills. That hits different parts of your neurochemistry, having this uncertainty. And it's one way to accomplish that, I suppose.
Absolutely. I know the stereotype, and maybe you could speak to this as being yes or no, but the stereotype is that a woman who becomes a dominatrix specifically is a woman who's aged into it, because women who are in their 40s and 50s are not necessarily the most successful women at the strip club, right? So they age into dominatrix because also it's a skill that you need to have a certain level of social skill to do, that I think you develop more as you get older and more confident.
Right.
And so
Well, I think one of the things that you've touched on is that in the space of professional BDSM, age is not a disadvantage. I mean,
Right.
having a certain maturity gives you authority. And there's a lot of men who fetishize mommy figure or the boss figure. So you need to look the part if you're going to execute on that for a certain kind of guy. But there are 20-year-olds who just happen to be really pervy, who find their way into it as well. I think the fact that you can persist in the business into your 60s and 70s, which I've observed, is proof that power of fetish is that it can kind of overwhelm some of the other biases that might diminish, in some eyes, a woman's sexual appeal as she ages.
So this research started all the way back in your 20s.
Yes, let's call it research rather than entertainment or personal sexual exploration. But yeah, it was something that I sort of stumbled on. There was a chat room on AOL back when AOL had chat rooms, I think 1993. I had good experiences and I had a lot of fun. And that was how I encountered some of the dominatrixes who served as models for this character I developed.
So what is the most significant thing you learned about yourself doing this research and this work?
Oh, boy, that's a tough question. I don't know if it's well, okay. So obviously there's an element that it's okay to pursue my curiosities, that there's an outlet for it, that other people share my fascinations, that this can be fruitful. That's pretty heretical. The idea that something that I like might be something that others like too. That the personal consequences of doing this stuff, like of writing it, of even being open, of going to a swing club in Paris, they're nil. I have faced no personal consequences that I know of having been forthright about all the things that I've done in the name of research. So maybe I diminish the likelihood of something bad happening by talking about it in the context of research. But still, I think it's pretty interesting how little people care.
I think that's really the theme of this entire episode, is really accepting that we put so much importance on the opinion of other people. And meanwhile, we're a blip in their story. And what I'm working on, and a lot of the women I work with are working on, is putting down this idea that you can fuck your whole life up, because you really can't. You really can't.
The opportunities for reinvention are constant. I mean, I went from engineering. I did a 180 with the writing, and now who knows? I joke that I need a new degree every decade, and I haven't quite figured out what the 50s are going to be, but it should be interesting.
So what was the progression? It was engineer, then what was it before writing?
My undergraduate degree was in manufacturing systems engineering. And that was at that crazy little engineering school in Michigan. Then I did a master's degree in technology and policy at MIT. So I thought I would get away from engineering. I actually wanted to distance myself. But then the financial, not the crisis, but there was like a downturn in the early 90s. So I'm like, okay, I'll be an engineer again. So I had a fallback. I went back to engineering, and then I worked as a consultant, as an engineer, and then I wound up doing a Ph.D. and then working in software. I lost my job. I've worked for a couple companies that have gone under, and it sucks. But you just keep at it and you keep moving forward and you find new opportunities and new interests. I've always put a greater value on new experience than maybe consecutive achievement. So that certainly impacts the trajectory I've followed.
What's next for you? Are you going to develop this into a television show? Or are you going to develop this into a movie, into a series?
So
you don't
they're
know?
pitching it for a limited series. But if you look at, for instance, The Queen's Gambit, I mean, that was written, 40, 50 years ago. So the likelihood of any one book becoming a thing on TV or in movies is low. But you don't win if you don't play. So it's out there. They're talking to people. I would happily be involved in anything. And then I have an idea for a third novel that's got nothing to do with the first two, but borrows some of the ideas about kind of pervy, deviant sex, but puts it into a more vanilla context because I just find this stuff so interesting. So
maybe you could become a sexologist in your next degree.
Maybe. Who knows?
Or you could use your engineering degree to develop like some amazing like sex toy for postmenopausal women.
It's pretty crazy talking about menopause, isn't it? Like that M word. Oh my gosh.
And there's so much stigma around it still that's been my hesitation is like coming out of the menopause closet. Like I'm supposed to pretend that I'm 53 and not in menopause. Like obviously I am. Like, hello, everybody else is too. But there's so much pressure to stay young. And we're told that being over 50 or over 55 is a dead end when obviously it's not. You can reinvent yourself at any time like you have.
Something funny along those lines happened the other day. So I had guys in my bathroom doing some work and I have my HRT pill and I had them in little pouches because I'm traveling a lot right now. And I couldn't find my little blue pills. I'm like, shoot, where'd they go? And then I thought, oh my gosh, I hope one of the workers didn't take it thinking it's Viagra. Wouldn't that be funny? With this crazy moment where I'm like, could this be mistaken for Viagra? And if so, this guy's in for a rude surprise because it's not going to work that way.
Yeah. Sorely disappointed if he takes that.
Not going to help him with his dick.
It is definitely, estrogen would definitely not help him with that. Not at all. So everyone has the dream that they're going to write a novel, right? I think that's a pretty common dream. What's been the best part of the whole thing? Has it been the research and meeting all these amazing women that have helped you craft the characters?
Well, that's the most fun part. But I got to say, pretty exciting launching your baby into the world, giving birth to it. So I just had my publication date. And once it hits like some readers, that's pretty thrilling. I don't want to hear the bad reviews. Like it's hard enough being a writer, but like if somebody likes it, that's pretty compelling. You're like, oh my goodness, I guess I did hit a nerve, like in a good way. And I highly recommend that experience. I think it's my own approach to exhibitionism. I don't want to be naked in a room, but I do enjoy being naked on the page and, and see what happens when the words find a pair of eyeballs. That's pretty cool. I'm sure like your experience as a performer.
Oh, absolutely. And finally letting go of other people's opinions and expectations of what a woman, especially a woman over 50, should be doing with herself.
I do sometimes regret, though, that I didn't sort of have these ideas and this impetus like a little younger. So I'm like, man, if only I'd been a little hotter when I wrote this book. Think of all the fun I could have had. Man, I would have been beating the partners away with a stick. It would have been so crazy. But it is. I do get the odd come on. So it's not without its charms and its moments of ego gratification. So that's nice too.
So to close out the interview, if you could get in a time machine and give some advice to your 30-year-old self, what would you tell her?
Ditch the guy and go crazy. Just don't worry about the job. Don't worry about all the things that you think are important. Go travel, find a hot Italian lover, do crazy things, and then enrich your memoir for when you write it when you're 90.
There you go. Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to Your Magical Midlife. I'm Kate Higgins, your host. You can follow me on Instagram at Your Magical Midlife. You can also check out my offerings on my website, which is www.yourmagicalmidlife.com. I offer individualized coaching for women 45 plus who are seekers, dreamers, and out-of-box thinkers. I also offer luxury retreats that include ritual, rites of passage, and ceremony for women 45 and beyond. I'd be so excited to work with you. Also, if you're feeling kind and you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a 5-star review as it opens this podcast to a broader audience and keeps me in those pesky algorithms. Thank you so much for your partnership with me. I appreciate you. Have a great week.